Hey folks, most people think that in order to retire early, that you have to start in your 20s and that early retirement isn't possible unless you start back then. And I just want to let you know today before we get started that that's absolutely not true. I retired at 51 and really didn't start my retirement planning or journey until about the age of 38 after a nasty divorce. And once I figured out some of these steps that I'm going to share with you, um, I think you're going to find that for those of us that are in our 30s, 40s, and 50s that don't have $1 million or millions of dollars and think it's impossible, you're going to start to really find that there is a pathway to get you there. That if you're intentional and you just take the steps and you commit to yourself that you want to do it, then you're going to do it. And today's steps are going to be simple, they're going to be beginner friendly, and they're just going to be a blueprint. There's not going to be a lot of jargon, there's not going to be a lot of high level talk. It's just going to be kind of, as I like to say, straight up no chaser, things that you can do to get you over the finish line, even if you feel like you're behind, like I was when after my divorce. So the first thing you have to get right in order to retire early is you have to get your mindset right. You got to get your head right. We always talk about getting our head right because the biggest barrier is not money. It's really the belief in ourselves that we believe that it's too late for us to be able to get to that point. And the truth is that whether you're 40, 45, even 50, you can still build real wealth. And you just really got to have a clear game plan and you have to believe that you can do it. When I just to give you some perspective, I only had about $30,000 to my name, and some of that was tied up in a house after I went through my divorce back in 2010. And here I am now at 53. I've been retired for a couple years, so it's possible. But there were some things that I had to get right, and so I'm sharing those with you now. So the first thing you really have to do, first concrete step is you have to know your real number. And, I'm not going to give you a fancy breakdown of how to calculate it. There is on my uh, chapter description, or I'm sorry, my channel description, there's a calculator in there that'll help you get to some of the numbers. But what you have to figure out is you have to figure out your annual spending. And I'm not talking about what you make because you don't spend all of what you make, just quite frankly, because a lot of that goes to taxes, but really thinking about what it is that you need to spend on an annual basis and take whatever that number is for you and then multiply that by 25. Now, that 25 represents the years, and that's your overall number. So if your retirement is going to be 30 years, if your retirement is planning on 40 years, and there's resources online that'll help you figure out your life expectancy. So I've done mine to 100, so it's a little bit of a longer window. But the reality is most of us probably aren't going to make it that far. I hope you do. I hope you do, but most of us aren't going to make it that far. So take a look at some of those, and I'll try to find a link to a life expectancy calculator and put it in the description. If I can't find it, I apologize in advance. But get an idea of what your retirement is, and then base that on your age so you're realistic. And the reality is that your spending drives everything, not your income, not your age, and not your investments. But I say all this to say that it all depends on your individual circumstances. And I like to extrapolate it back to what's my budget? What do I need on a monthly basis? And then how do I invest and build up into that? And I'm going to talk about that. So stick around as we continue down the path. Step two is one of the first things you really have to do is you got to fix your cash flow. If you're starting later, you don't got a lot of time. You know what they say, ain't got no time for shucking and jiving. So you got to start looking at ways to cut what I call the big four really quick. Number one is housing. When we're younger and when we got a big family and we're doing a bunch of stuff, we want to have the big house because we want to look like we made it. And look, there's nothing wrong with that, but big houses are expensive because you got to have your utilities, you got to have the cleaning, you got the heating, you got all these different things, maintenance. So ask yourself the question, is the house that I'm living in right size for where I want to be when I retire? Because again, if you're going to shift your mind, then you need to go all in on this. Because if you try to tiptoe in and tiptoe out, it's just not going to happen. Number two is your transportation. I can't say, some of us out there, look, I had a friend of mine that used to sell Audis. And I asked him one time because I saw a guy at my job who was an admin that was driving this $80,000 Audi. And I said, how do these people afford these Audis? Because I know what I can afford, and I'm not going to go out and buy an Audi. And he said, Saab, he says, the reality is a lot of those cats that are out there with those nice cars, they're living at their grandmother's house in the basement, not paying any rent, and everything they make goes to their clothes and their car. So if that's the kind of lifestyle you live, then this isn't the channel for you, because that's not going to get us to where it is that we need to go. I certainly don't live like that. Never have, never will. Number three is your food budget. Take a look at what you're spending on food. Do you need to go to all those restaurants all the time? One of the things that I've started to do, particularly in my retirement, is I started to eat cleaner. I started to eat single ingredient foods. They really save the day, because I go out and buy a bag of beans. I just made quinoa for the first time last night. And sure, I use a little bit of chicken broth, which is processed, but I cut out that processed food and it saves a bunch of money. So again, I'm not saying that everybody do that, but ask yourself, do you need to be at Applebee's every Tuesday night for their 2-for-1 specials? And the answer is no, because those 2-for-1 specials still cost you a lot, because you get the drinks, you get everything else. And then what I have for number 4 really should be number 1, because this was clutch for me after my divorce and when I started to try to rebuild, and that was debt. You got to get out of debt. That high interest credit card debt, it snowballs in the opposite direction of compound interest. Compound interest, you're at $10,000, you make $1,000 a year. You're at $100,000, you make $10,000 a year. You're at $1 million, you're making $100,000 a year, just in the interest, because the more you have, the more you make. But then when you turn that around, the inverse of that is credit card debt, because these 20 and 30% interest rate credit cards, these things are eating you up. They're taking all your money from you, and you don't see it because you say, oh, I could pay that $35, $40 a month, but that's $35, $40 a month that could be making $30, $40 a month when you invest. So that's all I'm going to go down, because this video isn't about your debt, but it's a step that you have to take. So now let's take a look at how you could parlay and start to build to get yourself to that number that you've calculated in one of the earlier steps. So this step is really maximizing your retirement accounts. And you know, this is where people get tripped up, because people say, well, I don't want to invest because I don't trust the markets. Look, the markets are undefeated. I was talking to my financial advisor last week. He said the markets are undefeated over the last 100 years. And the reality is yeah, we had a depression, we had recessions and stuff like that. But on average, over the last 100 years, the S&P 500 has been up something like 11%. So if I can make 11% and maybe lose a couple percent one year and then make that up in subsequent years, I'm all good. But don't make it complicated, because we start talking investing, people want to make it complicated. And then once you make it complicated, then it just turns people off and we say, oh, we can't do it. But you really only need to focus on a few areas. You can focus on your 401k accounts, and those are usually your employer sponsored accounts. So if you're in a nonprofit, a lot of times you'll have a 403b, but really those are just tax advantaged accounts that you put money in pre-taxes into a mutual fund, and it grows over time. And then once you do that, depending on income limits, and the income limits are fairly high for most people, you can go into a Roth IRA or traditional IRA just to put that money away. If you put money into a traditional IRA, now here's the beauty of it. A traditional IRA, you put that money in, and that money that you put in is deducted from your taxes. And a Roth IRA, it grows tax-free. So it just depends on how you want to move it. And then the last is, if you have it, a healthcare spending account. Put that money in a healthcare spending account, so that we could put pre-tax dollars in to pay for healthcare related issues. And, you know, with everything going on with healthcare, we want to make sure that we're on top of all of that. But, you know, the order that you want to look at when you do this is, you know, you want to look at the place that give you the match. The 401k, the employer usually gives you a match, like, I don't know, 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% or something like that. Then go into your Roth, because it grows tax-free. And then just all your other tax advantage accounts. So if you're in like a 457 or something like that, and then just invest the rest. And, you know, when you started late, or if you're starting late, this is really the key, because those tax advantages are really clutch and save you a bunch of money over time. The next thing I'll tell you is invest in the simplest portfolio possible. People get all caught, and you go to these other YouTube channels, and you know, you see the look on my face, because I get aggravated sometimes, but you go to these other YouTube channels and everybody gets really complicated about the way that you invest. And so what ends up happening is you're 40 years old and you spend 5 years trying to figure out how to invest. So here's what works, and this is what I did, and this is the way I looked at it, and I just simplified it, and here I am, 53, retired. So say what you want. It worked for me. It could work for you. So that's where it's at. And so the first is, I look at like just total U.S., you know, stock index funds. So if you look at like the NASDAQ or the Dow or the S&P 500, those are funds that track the major indexes on the stock markets. And a lot of those funds actually pay dividends on the particular stocks. And so not only do you make money with the returns, but you also can make money with the dividends that get reinvested. And so if you get a dividend of 5%, you invested $100. Now you got $105 because that that 5% is reinvested, and now you get interest on 105 as opposed to 100. I mean, it really just kind of grows on top of itself. Why does it sound weird? Because it's people with money that have been doing this for years that you don't know about. So before you get critical about all of this, listen to the game that I'm spitting you. You know, y'all like think it's bougie. I'm like, it's fine, but I'm trying to give you $1 million worth of game for free. The next one is, you know, like an international index fund. When I started my 401ks years ago, I was I always saw that the economy in the U.S. did good, and international funds went down. And then when international funds did good, that was when we were in a recession. Now, I think it's changed a little bit. And again, I'm not a financial advisor, never played one on YouTube. But I think now in the era of globalization, it's just a little bit different. But I would suggest that you just, you know, look at those index funds. And then there's the third one I'll talk about are bond index funds. And I'm not here to tell you that I have a full understanding of bonds, but I'll tell you this. I have 3 municipal bond funds that are all gaining price, paying me dividends, and anytime I have a loss, I can harvest those losses and write them off on my taxes. And all of those dividends, or all the money that I'm making in those, is tax-free. And it's all based on the investment in entities. I don't do corporate bonds, I do municipals. And they're basically investing in cities and towns and infrastructure and things like that. Because besides U.S. treasuries, these are, you know, unless you're in some podunk town that's about to go bankrupt, they're a pretty good deal. Now, you don't make 30-40% on them, but they're good for stability, because you need that stability when you're investing your money. Because if you're like me, you don't ever want to go broke, baby. So, and what it does is this really builds wealth in the background. And people say, you know, in this current economic time, what's going to happen with all this tariffs and all that kind of crap. But here's the thing. If you look at what people that have that money, if you look at what JP Morgan, you look at what people in the administration, you look at what everybody tries to protect, the one thing they try to protect is the stock market. And so if you don't have money in the stock market, you're losing out. And this is the way to do it. Don't make it complicated, because nothing about what I do is complicated, and nothing I ever tell you about is complicated. And if you ever want to talk about it, you know, you got my conversations with Salvador, you send me an email, we set up a Google Meet, and we talk about these things. But again, I'm not a financial advisor. I would recommend that you talk to one, but I just keep it simple, because the thing is that the smartest people in the world are able to take things that are incredibly complicated and make it sound simple. Then the next thing you want to do is take a look at early retirement bridge. So if you want to retire before you're 59 and a half, try to figure out, how am I going to pay for my life then? And because you can't take money out of your investment accounts before you're 59 and a half, if you're like, I'm 51, I had to have a way, access to funds that I could use. So I had like 457s, things like that I could pull from, that I don't have to be 59 and a half to get the money from. But my point is just think about that. You could do brokerage investments, part-time work. You know, one of the things I do is I do this YouTube channel. Now, I'm gonna tell you, I'll be honest with you, YouTube's not breaking me off major dollars. I'm not making millions, but you know, a couple $100 here, a couple $100 there. It pays for golf and gives me that peace of mind that at least I have something. There's rental income. If you live in a place and you have a rental property, you know, raise the rent on those suckers and get paid. If you do some consulting, if you know something about something, people pay for you to give them game. Look at you, you're on my YouTube channel, and I know there's about 1,000 of you that wait every Wednesday and every Saturday for a video to come out, because you don't know what you're going to get, because there's information that's going to come that's valuable. Well, the thing is you know more than I do about stuff I know nothing about. And so there's an opportunity there. And then there might be a side hustle. You know, cats work at Amazon. Cats do all kinds of stuff just to make a couple dollars, not because you need millions and millions and millions, but it gives you enough to maybe pay your light bill, pay your car bill, you know, take your girlfriend out on a date or whatever it is that you want to do. So these are things that make it, that really make early retirement doable, particularly if you started late. Because remember, if you started late, it doesn't mean you're never going to retire. It just means you probably won't, you may not retire early, but at some point you'll retire because your health or something's going to happen, or you just get so old that nobody hires you. Then the last two that I have are, you know, number one, get your healthcare plan kind of squared away. There's a bunch of options out there. I know I always talk about the Affordable Care Act, and I know there's a lot going on with that. But again, it still gives you an option depending on where you live and so on. You got cost sharing out there where you have like the Farm Bureau. I know Joe Kuhn on Joe Kuhn's retirement talks about how he got connected with the Farm Bureau and they had costs. I don't know if the AARP has something, but you might look at those. Or you find a part-time job and you could look at a part-time job that gives you benefits. There's some out there. I don't know where they are because I haven't gotten one, but you can go out and get a part-time gig or look at a health savings account strategy where you take the money. I know the big thing right now is giving people their money back so they can buy healthcare, but putting that money into a healthcare savings account, you put the money in, you take out what you need, you take the money out that you need, and it's all tax advantage. But you got to make sure that you cover healthcare because I know there's some people that are like, I ain't paying that money. But the thing is, when something happens, those bills come in hot and those bills come in heavy, and things are a lot more expensive than you think they are. And then my final piece of advice is that start simple, start small, but you got to start now. You don't need perfection. You don't need a six-figure income. And the reality is you don't need to reinvent your life overnight. Just be consistent and take intentional steps. I'm living proof. I was a guy, like I said, I only had about $30,000 in my name after I got divorced. And I'm talking about that's in my retirement accounts. And I just took intentional steps, got out of debt, did some things, made sure I put the right people in my life. And then I got after it. And, the reality is that the past doesn't decide your future. Your next decision does. So if you don't want to do nothing about it, then that's on you. But if you want to kind of get to that place where you have control of your own time, these are the things that are going to help you get there. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out again. I know we're over time, but if you found this helpful, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and, let me know in the comments, when do you want to retire? What's the age that you're looking at? And what's the biggest challenge you have right now? Because these are the things that help inform content that I have so I could give you the latest of what's going on with me. So again, I know this was a longer one. I apologize. I do want to thank you for being part of the channel, being part of the fam. And, it's always remember that it's never my expectation that everybody retire early, but it is my expectation that you live your best life. So on that note, have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon.